Thank you for joining us today, Professor Pai. This is a series of discussions we're doing for the Esya Center, where we're generally speaking to academicians, lawyers, and other professionals involved with competition law and trying to understand what their views on are, where India's competition policy and strategy overall should be headed, particularly in digital markets, which, of course, as most of us know, give rise to certain unique challenges which competition authorities all over the world are dealing with. Basically, just generally where you feel competition strategy in digital markets need to head for India, and how we need to do things differently from, say, advanced economies like the US and EU.
Yeah. Mohit, I'm delighted to be here, and I saw some very good work from the Esya Center in terms of pushing the envelope in terms of our thinking about these issues. The point I want to make fundamentally is that information markets are different from goods and services markets because they have a cognitive dimension. That's just a fancy way of saying that the consumption and, in fact, the very existence of information goods affects the way people think, affects people's minds. Right? They affect our thought processes and the way we make decisions. Now, this is important because the capacity to use reason is the edifice on which we construct liberal democracy, free markets. But the capacity to use reason can be severely impaired. For instance, when we jump from issue to issue on social media, we can't use our capacity for reason. And this has political consequences. So this is the fundamental difference in the sense that there are political consequences which follow from information goods, information markets, information industries that don't generally occur in the old goods and services market. In a way, I think we should look at information goods as being similar to psychedelic drugs because they alter the way you think, right?
Right.
Now, having said that, there is a role for competition regulation. Although around the world, we've seen regulators use competition regulation and antitrust on the tech companies because they don't have other instruments. What worries you more is the cognitive dimension, but the only tool you have is antitrust. So you see a lot of use of antitrust in information markets. Although, barriers to entry are so little, the leaders of today might not be leaders of tomorrow. Market power is very hard to sort of determine and so on. But that's the way, people have been using competition regulation. But there is still a space for competition regulation, right? Concentration of market power in a few hands is bad for markets and is bad for society in general, right? In India's case, especially, right, because we have an edge in tech. Technology is India's growth engine.
Yeah.
We have entrepreneurship taking off, especially in the young demographic, and we have a huge demographic challenge. So ensuring livelihoods and success and development growth of people over the next 10, 20 years requires us to have a very, very pro-innovation competition space. So striking down anti-competitive behavior and being pro-innovation, I think is a very important policy goal, right? And therefore, antitrust has a role. And I think a cross-cutting competition regulator with jurisdiction across sectors is a great idea in our case. But there's a need to go beyond competition regulation, right? How do you address the cognitive dimension, the political dimension of information markets? We have to figure out how to govern this, right? It's not a competition regulation question as much as it's an industry governance question. So how do we govern information industries? How do we govern information companies? How do we govern data? That's the big challenge which we have to work on. And in this, I think the most important thing is to preserve, protect, and promote India's foundational constitutional values. Those should be the lodestar, they should be the North Pole, the magnetic north of our policy orientation.
So basically, my question is that when you say that a cross-sectoral regulator is good for competition, do you feel it should also be looking into issues such as privacy, quality of products, which are not necessarily factors that are considered in traditional antitrust analysis? And what would your thoughts be on what domains this competition authority should include when addressing concerns that are there in digital markets?
See, I think whether it's competition or any other kind of policy, I think we have to match objectives to instruments, right? If the objective is to ensure that there is no concentration of market power, then you have something called antitrust regulation that you can use to make that happen. Now, if you also want to use antitrust regulation for privacy, data, and all other things, you'll run into difficulties, right? You might run into complex issues that are emergent in the sense that they might not have appeared elsewhere, but when you do it in India, they'll appear, right? So I think it's a good idea to match goals to instruments and have a very, very good antitrust regulator. But if there are other issues which come from information industries, which respect to privacy, data protection, localization, international dimensions, I think it's better to have this in the hands of other people. Whether it's whether you put the antitrust division within an overall governance authority or you separate it out is a design question. But you shouldn't get a policeman to decide what music to play and how many people should be dancing in bars as we do now, right? That's one of the problems with the way we do governance. We entrust one agency with a whole lot of mandates which they might not be able to simultaneously fulfill.
That is true. So I think just to round out the question from your perspective, where you're aware of the various discussions that are going on in the country, as well as knowledge that has been created, what do you feel moving forward the focus needs to be on from a knowledge building and a capacity building perspective to empower the competition authority itself to regulate these issues better, and also to sort of develop an ecosystem around these issues to promote debate and more academic literature in an Indian context?
Yeah, I think the first thing is that those of us who are connected with the technology economy in one way or the other, in the information economy one way or the other, have a responsibility to think through the social consequences of that technology. Now, whether you're an entrepreneur, whether you're a regulatory relations person, whether you're a think tank, whether you're a civil servant looking at these areas, you do have a responsibility to look at the broader social consequences. Are the consequences of the technology of the information markets consistent with India's foundational constitutional values? Right. Now, once you say that you have a responsibility, what does it mean? Right, and that means different things to different. I think academics, think tanks have to push the envelope of knowledge in terms of how to govern these industries. I just said that they're extremely different from anything that we've known before. So obviously the governance mechanisms that we had to regulate, say, coal or combustion engines are not quite the same governance mechanisms that you have to regulate social media, for example, or govern social media. So you need different ones, and that's the job, really the job of the thinking community, of the academia and think tanks, and of the policy-related civil servants whose job it is to govern it. Right? I don't think you will get an answer either from antitrust regulator or from the courts or from think tanks, academia, businesses. I think everybody has to come together. There has to be a greater conversation on this and a greater debate and a more non-partisan, non-polarized kind of a debate. Right? Because fundamentally here you have to balance the rights of the individual against the rights of a private company to make money and the right of a nation state to ensure that there is stable order, right? And in this game, you'll see that the individual is the weakest. So you'll need to, handicap the individual, give the individual rights a greater handicap such that they can hold their own in this conversation with the state and with the corporate, private business firms.
So I think that about covers it. Though I had one last question. I find it interesting that you refer to prefacing our approach on founding constitutional values. So given in the current context that these itself seem to be in question, can you briefly elaborate on what you believe these values to be and how you would apply them to, say, information markets and digital markets?
Right. So I think the fundamental thing which the preamble of the Constitution tells us, right? I don't think we need to read the remaining 304 pages. I think the first page preamble tells us what we have to do, right? And it's not just a document. I mean, it's not just a way to run a government, but I think it's the most enlightened way that we can organize our society. Now, whether it's technology, non-technology, information, non-information, that's a fantastic prescription. And as I said, a magnetic north to orient ourselves. What it's basically saying is that you have a plural society, which is traditional, which has had a very interesting path through history, where there have been inequities which have accumulated through things. There are also a lot of good things. And you want to live as one. You want to, you have to live in India. We have to, we the people of India want to create a society where we want to live together, despite our plural nature. And we have to recognize the fact that the individuals who have rights, that's your basic premise of the preamble of the Constitution, and the balance of all of these things. Now, you don't want to do anything in the information age that upsets this balance that we've been trying to create so hard since 1950, right? And just when we are in a position where, these values are under challenge, and it's a good thing that they're under challenge, because I think every generation has to fight for these values. But at that point where you are, when there is a social conversation going on in terms of these values, you don't want technology and information markets to go and create a default, or a fait accompli that then the society has, no way to change.
Right. Those are some very interesting perspectives and took us beyond, I think, just the antitrust lens. And that was very valuable. And thank you so much for taking time out again today, and hope to keep engaging with you on these issues and others as well in the future.